Hey, welcome back to the channel. Listen, there's been a lot of energy recently over the last year on this notion that states can come up with legislation, quote, nullifying federal laws as it results to enforcement of anti-gun federal legislation. Um, and that's just not true. First of all, the state cannot nullify a federal law. They can choose to not enforce it. Um, and here's the problem. No one seems to understand that federal trumps state, period. It's just the way it is. So let's go back to the winter in Portland and Seattle when then President Trump told the Department of Justice to deputize local law enforcement and have local law enforcement protect the federal buildings and others. Now, federal law provides that the federal government, specifically the Marshals Service, can, on their own, deputize whoever they need to enforce federal law. Now, they cannot conscript an individual. So let's say that Joe is a sheriff, and they can't go to Joe and say, we're going to deputize you personally. But what they can say is, we're going to deputize as many of you who wish to be, and then you become federal officers, and then you will do what we were deputizing you for. Well, what does that mean for Second Amendment enforcement? It means there's a whole lot of local law enforcement that then would become part of the confiscation army. At least 50% of all law enforcement officers will suck on that tit. 50%. That's a lot. So if you're in Los Angeles, for example, there are 10,000 sworn officers in Los Angeles. That means 5,000 deputized officers then become federal officers, and the local sheriff and police chief can't do anything about it. And it lasts. The deputization lasts as long as the Marshal Service says it will. You understand what I'm saying? So, interestingly enough, there was a guy, a Democrat, a guy named Blumauer, who tried to put forth Blumenauer. He's a Democrat from Portland, from Oregon. Tried to put forward legislation to prevent the federal deputization of local law enforcement. Now, what's important about that is that the current law, and by the way, it went nowhere. The statute is 28 U.S. Code 566C Charlie. Quote, the United States Marshals Service shall execute all lawful writs, process, and orders issued under the authority of the United States, and shall command all necessary assistance to execute its duties, close quote. That's a really broad authority. Now, they can't conscript an individual, but they certainly have the authority to deputize people who are in law enforcement to come work for them. Now, these Second Amendment protection acts that a lot of states are doing seek to punish local law enforcement and others who try to enforce federal anti-gun law. The problem with that is that once these people become deputized, they are no longer subject to that. So they cannot be punished, or if they can try, but the lawsuits would would break them. So my point is, be thoughtful about feeling good that some state or even your state passes, and mine has one coming up, passes a Second Amendment Protection Act, thinking that somehow that's going to stop a broad enforcement of anti-gun legislation, especially if it gets down to confiscation. They could easily say, well, we're going to have an inspection process. So we have this list of everybody that has that at any time got a tax stamp for NFA item, like a suppressor or any other weapon or whatever. And then they will just go with warrants and say, well, we know you got a tax stamp for a suppressor, which means you have to have a gun. So we have reasonable probable cause to come and do a search of your house for that and confiscate it. You see how that works? And they will just deputize those who are greedy for money from local law enforcement. So right now, that statute is still in force. And there's no one who, remember, that was a Democrat. And he was mad because Trump deputized local law enforcement to go and protect against Antifa and the rioters. But now the shoe's on the other foot. The Democrats will use the deputization of the Marshal Service to go and confiscate weapons if that's, especially with someone like Kamala Harris, for example, who is all smelling herself and feeling totally empowered to do something like that. Totally wouldn't put it past her to have something like that happen. So I would caution everyone to think carefully about how you mitigate that. I don't think it's possible. And I would love to think that our brothers and sisters in local law enforcement, that's state, sheriff, and city, would not enforce it. But money talks, bullshit walks, right? And a lot of these people want their pension, and a lot of these people want that money. And they will get paid their salary from the police and additional money from the feds if they're deputized to do that. So, like I said, the federal government has a lot of power, and we don't think about that enough. So, having said that, by the way, this is Black Rifle Coffee. So I'm a fan of theirs, and I don't care if y'all are mad or not. I like their stuff. So with that, thanks for watching, and carry on.